Event Planning Contracts. In video 13, Identifying Your Contractors, Services, and Suppliers, we discussed how to identify and qualify all of your event goods and service suppliers and pre-qualify them before signing a contract with them. Now that you know who you are going to work with on any given event, you must develop and agree to signing a written contract. Depending on the supplier, whether they provide a service or products or both, the contracts will vary somewhat. However, they all need to be ironclad, and they will have more similarities than differences. Before we look at the key components of an effective contract, let's cover some contract basics. A contract is what is called a bilateral agreement, which means it works in two directions. It protects your interests as one signee, and it protects the interests of the supplier, the other signee, based on mutually agreed to terms. It is, above all, legally binding whether it's titled contract, letter of agreement, memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding, letter of confirmation, or letter of intent. A contract is always in writing. Verbal or unsigned contracts are not legally binding. Fundamentally, contracts must have the following characteristics. They must be easy to understand, written clearly and concisely. They must cover all the elements that are important to both parties and protect both parties equally. They must clearly and comprehensively spell out all of the important details of the agreement. Both parties in the agreement must be competent and have the ability to enter into a contract. Minors, for example, cannot sign a contract. They must contain consideration, which means that in exchange for a service there is a monetary compensation agreed to by both parties. They must be meeting of the minds or mutual assent documents. And they must be legally accurate and binding. We always recommend that you have an attorney who specializes in contracting review and approve your contracts. The key articles of a contract that should be present in all your event planning agreements are as follows. The terms and conditions in a contract contain all the details of the agreement. It is a laundry list of what will be supplied and when, as well as the identification of the contracting parties. It will contain 1. Complete contact information for both parties with business names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and web URLs. 2. The details of the event itself, including venue, load-in and load-out times, where the supplier's items or services are to be delivered or rendered, and any other details of the agreement that relate specifically to venue considerations. 3. The detailed specifics of what is to be provided. This is the meat of the contract and often is integrated in spreadsheet format listing each individual product or service supplied, deadline for its delivery, line item price, and any other bits of information the signers deem should be carved in stone. 4. Additional details. For example, if the supplier will also provide personnel on site to manage the supplies, as in the case of technicians for AV equipment, all these specifics will be outlined in this section. 5. Warranties. These are items that aren't contracted to as must-haves, but are basically a wish list of expectations between the parties. For example, the event planner might request that the supplier's technicians wear event management team shirts and name tags, but will not have any dispute with the supplier or supplier's staff if they refuse to do so. 6. Insurance information. Typically, suppliers and their staff members will be named as additional insureds on the event liability policy. The specifics of this needs to be outlined in the contract. 7. Compliance with laws, standards, and regulations. In this section, the supplier agrees to follow the applicable laws or regulations relating to their product or service. For example, if the venue allows some pyrotechnics for fanfare display but not other types, the supplier agrees in writing to these terms. The actual regulation should be referenced in this section. 8. Financial information. In this section, the compensation and type of currency if more than one country is involved, tax requirements, and deadlines and amounts for deposits and payments are all detailed in this section. Riders, if any, need to be included as well. Riders are add-ons to the contract. For example, the venue may have a list of expectations it has of all outside suppliers that come into the facility to provide goods and services. This document is attached to the contract as a rider and thus becomes part of the agreed-upon terms. 10. Signature blocks. These elements complete the contract. A competent signer from each party who has the capacity to sign for the party must sign, date, and spell out their name here. It is wise to have a notary public witness this process and add their stamp and signature. Your contract can be amended by both parties at any time, providing the amendment allows enough time for the details to be fulfilled, and both parties agree to the amendment in writing, sign, date it, and include the amendment or amendments in the working contract. It is critical that the contact with whom you are amending the contract has the authority to sign off on the amendment. Note that the point person you originally signed the contract with may no longer be with the supplier company by the time the event takes place, and his or her replacement may be unfamiliar with the contract. If your point person changes, make it a point to meet with them in person by online conference or phone call, and ensure that they are aware of the contract and all of its contents. Always have copies of all signed contracts readily accessible at the event. Often the people on site delivering the products and/or services have never seen the contract and are just doing what their supervisor told them. If you are not receiving everything agreed to in the contract, you can show it to the representative on site or use it to leverage the supervisor into making appropriate adjustments. In the event of a contract dispute, stay calm, level-headed, and don't lose your temper. First, try to address the issues of the people who are providing contract fulfillment on the site at the event. If they are unresponsive for any reason, move your communication up the ladder of command until you receive satisfaction. Tip: this is a type of incident when your risk management plan B might need to come into play. If the contract appears to be falling apart, you should have a backup supplier to help out. If you do not receive satisfaction from the company and you have followed all the right steps through the chain of command and kept your cool throughout the process, you now need to ask your attorney to intervene on your behalf. Note that you should have emergency attorney fees in your risk management budget for just such incidents. If it happens that you have to rely on your Plan B and the costs associated with implementing it, you will need to have your attorney open litigation against the supplier who breached the contract. At the point your attorney recommends this course of action, you need to mentally and emotionally wash your hands of the supplier in breach and focus on making your Plan B work for you. And yes, you should have a written if-then contract with your Plan B supplier that stipulates they have agreed to be a secondary provider in the event that they are needed, and that they are capable of fulfilling the obligations laid out in the contract with the primary supplier. When contracting for events, remember that these legally binding documents are the only way you can protect yourself from being taken advantage of by a supplier or suffering from a supplier breach of contract. Contracts are your friends and worth every bit of the effort that goes into securing them.